the excellence of execution, the five-time WWE champion, the WWE Hall of Famer, the best there is, the best there was, the best there ever will be, my favorite wrestler of all time, Bret the Hitman Hart. You couldn't watch a Bret Hart match and find any holes in them. Just ignore the Mania 26 match with Vince because that was more of just an angle match, but nevertheless, Bret Hart could always get the best out of anybody. And the one question that I have on my mind, well, actually I have many questions on my mind, but the one question pertaining to this particular topic, what would Bret Hart's career have been like had Goldberg not been a goddamn klutz, not hit him like a ton of bricks, actually protected him, not let him drop on his goddamn head during the figure four spot, and hit him with an inadvertent kick and caused at least 2 known concussions in that Starrcade 1999 main event? Would Bret Hart's career have continued to go on? Would he have decided to say, you know what, I got out of this unscathed? What if he hadn't suffered the concussions? Would he have just said, you know, I'm going to write out my WCW contract and ride off into the sunset? What would he have done? Well, we won't know because unfortunately Goldberg was a bit of a klutz, but let's talk about what could have been. I'm John Rentham with my real honest thoughts on what if Bret Hart had not gotten injured at WCW Starrcade 1999. So yes, Bret Hart is my favorite wrestler of all time. I've done multiple videos on Bret Hart. I went back and rewatched the Bret Hart WWE on A&E biography and kind of went off about the whole Goldberg thing and went on about how much I love Bret Hart because he is truly my favorite wrestler of all time. Even though other wrestlers got me hooked on wrestling, he kept me interested along with a handful of others. It wasn't just Bret, but I can go back and rewatch a Bret Hart match even from Stampede and enjoy it. I can enjoy his stuff with Jim the Anvil Neidhart. I can enjoy his first singles run in '88 that didn't last all that long. Mr. Perfect, so many great matches that he had that I couldn't possibly cover them in this video. And then talk about what could have possibly happened in the twilight of his career. I mean, because by Starrcade 99, he was 42. He didn't have that many years left. He'd been wrestling since 1976, 77, somewhere around there. It might actually, well, now that I think about it, it might have actually been about 77, 78 because he did start out as a referee. Nevertheless, let's go over some history, and then let's talk about that. But let me know where you think Bret Hart's career would have ended up had he not gotten injured. I'm not saying that Bret Hart could have saved WCW, but it certainly couldn't have made the program any worse had he been included. So he was born on in July of 1957 in Calgary, dramatic pause, Alberta, Canada. One of the 12 Hart children, and of course then his younger brother Owen, and actually that previous video that I did on Owen Hart factors into this. So watch that, and then watch this. And you'll kind of get a little bit of crossover stuff, because they sort of tie together, because I did a thing where, what if Owen didn't have that incident in the Kemper Arena and his career in life, most importantly, have been able to go on? Would it have affected Bret's career in WCW and beyond? So anyway, he started in Stampede. He did work in Georgia Championship Wrestling, also worked in New Japan doing tours over there. So he was getting exposure and breaks. And because he was one of Stu Hart's children, even though he was, learning, he was definitely getting better. I'm sure there's video floating around about him or of him versus Dynamite in New Japan, but there's definitely video in Stampede, him versus Dynamite. Back when Dynamite wasn't just juiced up to the goddamn, juiced up to the max. I mean, my God, it was incredible. It was amazing that he was able to move. I can't imagine how he suffered roid rage. I can't imagine why. Enough about Dynamite, that piece of shit. Glad he died. So, he, feuded with Dynamite. They always had great matches. And Bret then eventually went to the WWF when Stu Hart made a deal with Vince, or Vince made a deal with Stu. $1 million, 100 grand payments over 10 years. I guarantee you that Vince maybe made one payment for that, but and then totally just, said, nope to the deal, haha. The excuse that he used was, well, you started Stampede Wrestling, and then I had you close down, and then Bruce started one up. And not my Bruce, because I don't even know who my Bruce is, because he's not here yet. Haha. But nevertheless, it's supposed to be the Stampede Wrestling went away, and then Bruce Hart started up an incarnation of Stampede Wrestling. The territory was going down anyway. That was talked about in the Tales from the Territory Stampede Wrestling piece, there were various things that led to that particular territory going down as to why Stu sold it. And even though they had critical success and did feature some good talent, it was never going to be the same. So his early days in WWE was Cowboy Bret Hart, but he said, you need to actually be a real cowboy where I'm at, or otherwise these people will just look down on you. He suggests teaming up with Jim Neidhart and have Jimmy Hart as our manager will be the Hart Foundation. And they were great as heels. They feuded with the Bulldog, especially after Dynamite suffered that back injury. And then they did an angle where they attacked Dynamite. They beat up British Bulldog. They beat up Davey Boy Smith, that is. Got the titles from them and then ran with the championships for a while. And then they lost them eventually. They had multiple tag title runs. They won them again in 1990 when they put them back together the year before. And he did have an initial singles run. Mania 4 is a Battle Royal. I believe Bad News Allen, a.k.a. Bad News Brown, who was one of the people that actually led to the downfall of the Stampede Territory. And if you've seen that Tales from the Territories episode, you know what I'm talking about. In Bad News, Brown screwed over Bret, and then Bret destroyed the trophy. And it seemed like Bret was going to go babyface. And actually, by that point, it seemed like him and Jim were going to go face, because they had, like, Jimmy Hart had gone with Dino Bravo and the Fabulous Rougeaus and Earthquake, and then Earthquake and Dino teamed up in the Canadian Earthquake, and there was some good stuff. They still had their matches. I don't remember what happened to Mania 5. Forgive me. That one is, I know Owen had a match at Mania 5. And then they beat the Bolsheviks in like 30 seconds of Mania 6. They lost the tag titles to the Nasty Boys. And at Mania 7, and then quietly split up afterwards. Bret started his singles push. Won the title from Mr. Perfect, the Intercontinental Championship. Had a run for a bit. Lost it to the Mountie just before the 92 Rumble. Because even though he had the flu, the rumor actually was that he was looking to go to WCW. But he couldn't get out of his contract till September, and then by that point, Bill Watts had taken over and was cutting costs. Now, had he been able to go there at the time, Bret would have been able to feud with Pillman. He might have been able to feud with Austin, but God, I don't think Bret would have been able to do anything for WCW at that point. They were in such turmoil. So it's a good thing he stayed. He faced off against Piper for the Intercontinental Championship, beat him at Mania 8. That was great shit. Lost it to Bulldog at SummerSlam 92. That did not deter Bret. Won the title for WWF title from Ric Flair in Saskatoon. I believe Saskatoon. Had a house show. Held on to it for a bit. A number of months. Beat Shawn Michaels, champion versus champion at Survivor Series 92. Just retro-reviewed that if you want to check that out. And beat Razor at Mania, or not Mania, but Royal Rumble 93. Lost it to Yokozuna at Mania 9, and then Hulk Hogan cashed in the Money in the Bank briefcase well before the Money in the Bank briefcase was ever thought of. And then Bret never got his rematch. He did win the King of the Ring 93 tournament, beating in succession, I believe it was Perfect, Razor, and then Bam Bam. I think maybe, I'm trying to remember, because I know he beat Bam Bam in the finals. And I can't remember if it's Razor Perfect Bam Bam or Perfect Razor Bam Bam. But nevertheless, Jerry the King Lawler hits him in the head and ends up saying, okay, this is, we're going to start this feud. But then Jerry Lawler gets injured and he can't do this stuff, and he feuds with Doink for a bit. That feud gets kind of put on ice. And then the feud with Owen and stuff like that, and I talked about it in the Owen DVD, or Owen DVD, like I can afford DVDs, or like I want to put this stuff on DVD, like anybody would buy anything that I do on DVD. What I talked about in the Owen video, I'm not going to go over that. We had Survivor Series 93, Rumble 94, though, that's why I kicked your leg out of your leg is still a great quote. And then he lost the opener at Mania 10. Won the title from Yokozuna. Owens looking just all pissed off at him. They had the feud going into SummerSlam 94, where Bret beats him. It's great shit. Bret gets cost the title at Survivor Series 94. That's your son. Why won't you do that? That's your son. That's your son. God, Owen was great. And then he wrestled Diesel at the Royal Rumble 1995. Had a series of matches in 95, including one against Hakushi that was good. Not maybe just ignore the Bob Backlund one. At Mania 11, that wasn't very good. In fact, it wasn't very good at all. He did beat Diesel at Survivor Series 1995 after having some good matches, but having to carry a pre-Kane Isaac Yankem DDS at SummerSlam 95. He did win the Kiss My Foot match a bit earlier against Jerry Lawler. And then In Your House versus British Bulldog, December 95, a bloody match, a very bloody match, actually, very bloody for that time. A great match. Check that match out. Not a great In Your House, but that is absolutely incredible main event. And then the Iron Man match against Shawn Michaels. That's where the tension started to go with Shawn Michaels. I'm kind of skipping over some of this stuff with Bret. It's not like I'm trying to rush through, but I talked about so much of this stuff in previous videos. I'm just giving the overlay. He takes time off, goes to film Lonesome Dove, does one single shot before his contract's up against Austin in South Africa. And then Survivor Series 96 faces Austin after signing a 20-year contract, $10.5 million. And it was going to be incentivized and stuff like that, but it was a way to keep Bret around. And then a year later, Vince decides to completely go back on that deal. He was supposed to face, well, he got screwed over at the Rumble after winning it, after eliminating Austin, but the refs didn't see it because they were looking at Terry Funk and Mankind and saying, oh, these guys are doing this. And then, oh, let's just have, I don't know, let's have Austin win it. So he screws over Bret. And then Shawn's going to face Bret because Bret's going to win the Final Four match. But then Shawn loses his smile. Bret wins the Final Four match, wins the title, and then loses it a little bit later because Vince goes back to the big guys. He has Sid win the championship again and face Taker, while Austin faces Bret at Mania 13. Tremendous I Quit match. Great shit. One of the best Mania matches in history. Absolute classic. One of Bret's best matches, one of Austin's best matches. Go and check it out. Then the Hart Foundation forms. He has a knee injury. He's dealing with that. But they do the Canadian Stampede 10-man tag, one of the most raucous, insane reactions. Like, I get goosebumps just thinking about it. Like, you can feel the camera shaking. The arena floor is shaking. Because if it was LOD, Shamrock, Goldust, and Austin, if they won that, if the Harts lost, that entire venue would have been burned down. Vince McMahon would have been burned at the stake. It would have been hilarious. Also would have killed the company, but nevertheless. And then there was that. He did face Taker at SummerSlam 97. Shawn Michaels, as a referee, inadvertently, accidentally hit the Undertaker with a chair after Bret spit on him. But there we go. That actually sounded a lot less dirty in my head. He then he won the title, feuded with the Patriot a little bit. Survivor Series 97. He had decided just before, I'm going to go to WCW because Vince basically was pushing him out the goddamn door. So it was like an $8.65 million over 3 years. So just about $9 million. So it was $2.65 million or something like that. So I might be a little bit off on the math. And he had all this money and all this hype in the world. Survivor Series 97 happens, screw job. And then he appears on Nitro the next night. Is what they should have goddamn done. I'm going to continue to say that. Why they didn't have him appear on Nitro the next night. 10 million people would have hung on every goddamn word that Bret said. And the foot on the foot on the chest and a spike right through the goddamn heart. There you go. Even though WWE was on the rise, you can't tell me that Bret wouldn't have been able to put the stake through the heart. But no, they didn't do that. Now, he broke his knuckles, so he couldn't wrestle for a bit, and there was some kind of non-compete clause, but nevertheless, you could have brought him in, done that, had him do a promo, or recap the promo the next week, and say, Bret will be here next week. Make Bret your focus. Oh, but we got to get him for Thunder, get him for the B Show. We need a whole group of talent, despite the fact we have about 2 million people signed. And then they just continue to underutilize Bret Hart. Bret Hart wrestled at Sold Out 98 against Ric Flair, and was in feuds with Booker T, going nowhere, wrestling Dean Malenko, wrestling Conan. He was face, heel, not going anywhere. By Halloween Havoc 98, just about a year after he signed, he faced Sting in a match that should have been great. Sharpshooter versus a Scorpion Deathlock, and it was terrible. Halloween Havoc 98 then again was terrible because they made Bret basically as a cowardly heel, hit them with the bat, and you can make Bret a heel, but damn, it just didn't work. And then he did the steel plate thing with Goldberg in Toronto. That was great. And then he suffered a leg injury, and then Owens' tragic passing happened. And then he ends up taking some time off anyway because of the injury. Comes back in September, October 99. Renewed vigor. I said vigor. Hulk, get away from Hulk. No. Whatever. God damn it, Hulk. Anyway, he wins the title in the Mayhem tournament that was true mayhem because it went absolutely nowhere. It was insane because Russo was a nut. But then Bret didn't want to win the title a certain way, so he gave it up. And then they decided to have the title match take place at Starrcade 99. And then Goldberg basically injures him, and I've talked about all that and everything. He didn't hold on to his leg when he did the figure 4 post spot, so his head hit the floor. Those mats didn't absorb anything, and then he hit him with the shoot kick, and he didn't mean to. He didn't mean to. That's one thing I'll say about Goldberg, but he's still a klutz. And then he wrestled a hardcore match against Terry Funk and a few other matches and everything. He was clearly not okay because they didn't know that much about concussions back then. Even though they mentioned it, they didn't know that much about head trauma. And he would only wrestle a handful of matches. The title would be held up. Benoit and Sid would have a match at Sold Out 2000. Bret would, I don't think, would wrestle after that. He made an appearance screwing over Goldberg for the championship in that triple cage match thing, whatever the hell, War Games 2000. And then his contract was up in October 2000, and he left because he couldn't wrestle anymore. And then he appeared for the World Wrestling All-Stars. I reviewed all those if you want to check out those reviews. Then Bulldog, Mr. Perfect, his dad passing away, various things. But especially the death of his brother Owen, all this stress and all this stuff. And there were other people. Rick Rude passed away in 99. Various people that he was close to. I'm missing some. I know I am. Pillman passed away in 97. He had a stroke and was in a wheelchair for 3 months. And then he made up with Vince and did all the DVD, this kind of stuff. And eventually even made up with Shawn. What if that hadn't happened? What if he hadn't suffered those concussions? What if he had kept going on? What if, now, this is a whole bunch of what ifs. What if Owen, going back to that Owen video, what if Owen had continued to wrestle? What if Owen had been fine? What if that accident, what if that stunt had never entered anybody's mind and he had continued to wrestle? So Bret's still under contract at WCW until October of 2000. Okay, let's go with that. He would have been world champ at least for another few months. He could have feuded with Benoit there. You could have made Benoit versus Sid versus Bret in a 3-way. Oh my. Or you could have had Bret versus Sid, and honestly, Bret probably would have gotten the best match out of Sid right there. Even though that was probably Sid's second best pay-per-view match right below Survivor Series 96. He could have potential feuds with Sid. He could have, if they had still decided to do the Arquette thing, that would have completely killed the world title. But maybe with Bret, they would have been able to maybe not be competitive, but they wouldn't have sunk as low as they did. Bret was not going to save WCW at that point because they had marginalized him and used him terribly. And I did a 3-part series on Bret's time in WCW where they could have used him a whole lot better. That was a few years ago, but nevertheless, Bret could have meant so much more at WCW, but he could have been champion for a few more months. Say he was out of his because they were cutting so many contracts. They cut a whole bunch of contracts in September of 99. So they probably wouldn't have wanted to keep Bret on the books for another year at $2.65 million when they lost $60 million goddamn dollars in 2000. Granted, the merger with AOL Time Warner merger apparently cost them a whole bunch of billions. So just saying. But let's say he had been part of the reboot of the New Blood Millionaires Club storyline. He could have been part of the Millionaires Club, and he would have had to have carried pretty much everybody there. And it would have certainly been interesting. I'm not saying it would have been good, but it would have been interesting. If Arquette had won the world title, nothing against Arquette. Said it before, apologize when I did the You Cannot Kill David Arquette review. And by the way, if you do see You Cannot Kill David Arquette, if anybody has seen that and you see the beginning, you will see a brief clip of me from one of my older videos that I deleted due in part to really, really bad camera work and everything, and the fact that my older videos did not turn out the way I had liked. But there is footage, very brief footage of various YouTubers and me, because I am not that good of a YouTuber. I'm just a guy talking about wrestling. But the fact that my clip was put on there, I have made every effort to apologize to David Arquette if I ever say anything terrible about the guy, because honestly, He's a human being. He didn't want to do that stuff, and he gave a lot of his money that he earned from payoffs to the various families. Pillman's family, the family of Bobby Duncan Jr., and uh, others. I forget who. Draws. I think he might even donated Draws because Draws had his accident. So, say all that happens. It would have been in turmoil. He could have still been a world champion. They could have stripped him of the championship. The New Blood Millionaires Club storyline probably wouldn't have gone anywhere. They could have just sent him home and just said, collect your money. Say after his contract's done, maybe he could have gone to WWE. If he didn't patch things up with Vince, if all his health, if Owen was still there, maybe he would have patched things up a lot sooner. Maybe he could have gone to New Japan for a little bit. It certainly would have been interesting to see Bret Hart even at 40. At that point, he would have been 44 years old, approaching 45, because that would have been, 43. 43. Because that would have been 2000. So yeah, he would have been approaching 44. So he could have been a surprise at the 2001 Rumble. You're telling me that music, his music hitting wouldn't have been great? It would have been goddamn great. It would have been amazing. I would have loved to have seen that. Then if he went back to WWE and had made up all that stuff and everything because Shawn was well and truly out of it and wouldn't until he got saved later, traded one addiction for another. Say Bret had come back at the 2001 Rumble. Bret versus Angle? You could have done Bret versus Angle at Mania 17. That would have been incredible. You could have done Bret versus Rock at some point before Rock went off to Hollywood. That would have been great. You could have made Bret part of the WCW invasion, and that actually might have meant something. You could have Bret show up at the 2001 Rumble, and then you could have said, I came back, Vince, because WCW may have ended, but you sent me there, you cast me off, and now I'm going to gather everybody together to take you down. Bret could have been one of the figureheads of the WCW invasion. It probably wouldn't have worked because everybody would have believed him as a WWE guy because he was a WWE guy. But if Bret had been there in 2000 or 2002, he could have faced Brock. He could have faced Cena. He could have faced people like Rhino. That would have been pretty interesting. You never know what would have happened with Bret, but God, if Owen hadn't passed away and Bret hadn't suffered those concussions, he could have made peace with Vince, hopefully, and Vince would have realized money is money, given him a boatload. It would have been great because his contract would have been up with WCW in more than enough time for him to show up at the 2001 Rumble like Haku did when Ming was the current, hardcore champion and said, screw you, no one's going to stop me. I'm going to go to WCW or go to WWE. Okay, can we stop him? Should we get the championship? I'm not going to stop him because I'm not going to die. But if all those things hadn't happened, there's a whole bunch of what ifs. Bret could have had more classic matches, could have had a feud with Benoit, could have faced Eddie Guerrero, could have done so. He wouldn't have been able to really face Dean Malenko because Dean Malenko by mid 2001 was basically out. But he could have faced Test. He helped train Test. He could have faced Jericho. He could have done a whole bunch. If they could have had Bret versus Hogan and actually had it where Bret would have gone over like he should have at SummerSlam 93. So many possibilities that they could have done, that they could have done with Bret. If Owen had passed, I don't know if Bret would have gone back. I think a lot of the stuff still would have happened with Bret. And, by 2000, because Bulldog was out of the company by that point. So it would have been a shame if Bret had tried to team with Bulldog, because I don't think that would have worked. But it would have been interesting to see what Bret could have done if he hadn't gotten injured and had a few more years. Yes, he probably wouldn't have wrestled much past the age of 45, which means by SummerSlam 2002, we would have been on the tail end of his career, because he would have just been past 45 by that point. But God, just a few more years of Bret would have been great, because he still was in incredible shape. He still had his ability to continue to put on great matches, and it's a goddamn shame that he was not able to. And I love Bret. I mean, he seems fine now, but I hate that Bret Hart's career was ended like it was. I can't say cut short because he wrestled for 20 plus years. God, I just wish Bret was still around to wrestle. Not now, but just a few more years. It would have just been great. What do you think Bret Hart would have done had all those things not happened? Had Owen lived? Had he not suffered those concussions? I would love to hear from you guys in the comments. Please like, share, subscribe. Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Retlin. I'll see you soon.